Welcome to the Human Meme Podcast. I'm your everlasting host, David Bowles, and today we're going to have a lovely conversation about my new book. The Pharmacist's Bell introducing beautiful numbness. I was 10 years old the first time I understood what art does, not what it says it does, not what we teach that it does, what it actually does. The production was Hello, Dolly, at a community playhouse in a town where amateur theater was both social ritual and minor act of civic pride. I was a child in the ensemble, old enough to have memorized my blocking, and young enough to believe that what we were doing mattered in some way I could not yet name. The show went fine. The audience clapped politely. Nobody stood. Then the orchestra played the curtain call. An experienced actor standing next to me leaned toward another veteran and whispered 5 words that I have carried for more than half a century. They can't help but stand. The audience stood. Every audience stood. Every night, at that same orchestral moment, the house rose as a single body in response to a stimulus that bypassed deliberation entirely. The standing ovation then was never for us. It was for a sequence of notes arranged on paper by a technician of emotional response who had engineered a specific acoustic stimulus to produce a specific physiological reaction. The horns, the accelerating tempo, the brightening lights, the synchronized bow at the crescendo. Each element was a component in a machine, and the machine's product was the audience's body leaving its seat. I did not have the vocabulary at 10 to describe what I had witnessed. It took me more than 50 years to write it down. The book is called Beautiful Numbness: Art, Sedation, and 25 Centuries of the Standing Ovation. And this episode of Human Meme is about why I wrote it, what it argues, and what it cost to say it out loud. The book begins with my grandfather, Bill Vodenall, who was a pharmacist in North Loop, Nebraska during the Great Depression. His patients could not pay with money because they did not have money. So they paid with chickens, wedding rings, nuggets of panned gold from the creek. He accepted all of it because refusing would have meant letting his neighbors die. He held a community of 300 together by dispensing what it needed, when it needed it, in the dosage it could tolerate, and he took his payment in the only tender available. I followed in his footsteps, but in a curiously ridiculous way. I became an artist, an actor, then a director, then a producer, then a writer, then a teacher. And in each of those roles I dispensed something, not medicine that kept bodies alive, something subtler, an analgesic for the mind, the body, and the soul that keeps the patient still, that manages the pain of being conscious without curing the condition, that makes the unbearable bearable and calls the numbness beauty. That is the thesis of the book. It is not a complicated thesis. It is a devastating one. The argument runs like this. For 25 centuries, from the theater of Dionysus in Athens to the infinite scroll on your phone, institutional art in the Western tradition has functioned not as a liberating force but as a sedative. The beauty is real. The emotions are real. The catharsis, that Aristotelian word we all learned in school, the purging of pity and fear through the experience of tragedy, is real. And the function of all of it is to keep you still. And yes, I need to be precise about what I mean by institutional art, because the argument is specific in its target and should not be mistaken for a broader one. I am not talking about the person who sings in the shower. I am not talking about the child who draws in a sketchbook. I am not talking about the private act of creation, which may be anything, and which I do not presume to diagnose. I am talking about what happens when art enters the institutional channels, when it is selected by an archon, commissioned by a pope, funded by a patron, regulated by a code, distributed by a studio, certified by a university, or delivered by an algorithm. The private act of creation may be freedom. The institutional act of distribution is pharmacy. The book traces this pharmacy across its entire history, not a survey, a prosecution. It starts with Aristotle, who is usually taught as the man who defended art against Plato's demand that the poets be expelled from the ideal city. That's accurate as far as it goes. But what is less often taught is the nature of the defense. Plato said art arouses dangerous emotions that could destabilize the state. Aristotle did not disagree. He agreed that art arouses powerful emotions. He agreed that unmanaged emotions threaten social order. He agreed that the state has a legitimate interest in the emotional lives of its citizens. Where he disagreed was on the solution. Plato said, expel the poets. Aristotle said, use them. Use the poets. Use the emotions they arouse. Use tragedy as a purgative, a pharmaceutical, a cathartic, that expels the dangerous feelings of pity and fear in a controlled setting, so that the citizen can return to civic life emotionally emptied and ready to function. The audience weeps, trembles, and goes home. The conditions that produce the weeping remain untouched. Aristotle did not invent this idea. The dramatic festivals of Athens had been running for a century before he wrote a word. He described a technology that was already operational. He wrote the prescription for a drug that was already being dispensed. But his description formalized it, and the formalization became, through centuries of repetition and institutional adoption, the operating manual for every subsequent pharmacy in the Western tradition. The book follows the manual through Rome, where the arena and the spectacle manage the emotional life of an empire. Through the medieval church, where the liturgy and the cathedral administered the aesthetic experience of the divine as a technology of political obedience. Through the Renaissance, where the Medici and the Vatican weaponized beauty as an instrument of legitimacy. Through the Baroque opera house, where the Camerata in Florence invented a new art form specifically designed to replicate the emotional control that the ancients were believed to have exercised over their audiences. Through Kant, who accomplished the most elegant pharmacological maneuver of them all. He told the audience that the proper response to beauty was disinterested contemplation, free of desire, free of appetite, free of moral urgency, free of political response. And he called this absence of agency freedom. The audience's passivity, philosophically certified as liberation. That is the Enlightenment's gift to the apparatus. The Industrial Revolution mechanized the pharmacy. Dickens serialized novels in weekly installments that created the first mass dependency loops. The Hays Code in Hollywood ensured that every film that left the studio was a properly formulated medication, emotionally engaging enough to produce catharsis, morally resolved enough to confirm the audience's existing values, and ideologically safe enough to return the viewer to the street in a state of satisfied passivity. Television eliminated the last intervals between doses. Radio had brought the pharmacy into the home. Television kept it running from morning to night. The programming schedule was the prescription pad. Morning news for the anxiety of the new day. Soap operas for the isolation of domestic labor. Evening variety for the fatigue of the returning worker. Late-night music for the insomnia that the rest of the schedule failed to cure. And then came the phone. The smartphone is the culmination of 25 centuries of pharmaceutical development. It is the first technology that can deliver a continuous, personalized, algorithmically optimized aesthetic sedative directly into the patient's hand 24 hours a day, in any location, in any posture, without interruption, without institutional mediation, without any moment of unsedated consciousness in which the patient might think. The infinite scroll is the perfected prescription. But the chapter of the book that cost me the most to write was not the history. It was the chapter about the people inside the machine. Chapter 9. The 3 Tiers of Knowing. I spent more than 50 years inside the apparatus. I was, at various times, all 3 of the tiers the chapter describes. The first tier is the architects, the people who design the mechanisms of emotional response and know exactly what they are doing. The orchestrators who write the curtain call crescendo. The film editors who know that cutting to a close-up of a trembling lip at the moment the strings swell produces tears in 70% of the audience. The producers who understand that the Tony Awards exist not to honor excellence but to generate ticket sales. The architects are technicians. They take pride in their craft. Their knowledge does not trouble them because their knowledge is operational. They know how the trick works. They do not generalize from the trick to the system. The second tier is the practitioners. The vast majority of the artistic workforce, the actors, directors, writers, painters, dancers who operate the apparatus sincerely, who believe in the art, whose belief is not a failure of intelligence, but a necessary condition of the product's effectiveness. A sedative administered by someone who does not believe in it loses efficacy. The practitioner's sincerity is the active ingredient that makes the sedation work. The third tier is the one I occupied for the longest time and the one that is hardest to live in. The initiates, the practitioners who have seen the machinery but cannot leave the machine. Who know that the standing ovation is manufactured? Who know that the catharsis is a technology? Who know that the beauty is the mechanism of the control? And who continue to practice because the craft is real and the skill is real and the satisfaction of the skill is real, even though they know what the skill is for. The initiate is trapped not by chains, but by competence. The initiate has spent decades developing abilities that are genuinely impressive and that function only within the system the initiate has come to distrust. To leave the machine would mean abandoning the competence. The competence is the initiate's identity. So the initiate stays and practices and knows, and the knowing and the practicing coexist without canceling each other, because the drug is that good. The drug works on the pharmacist. The drug has always worked on the pharmacist. Aristotle knew how catharsis worked, and the tragedians still produced it. Wagner knew the Gesamtkunstwerk was an instrument of total aesthetic control, and he still wept at his own music. I know the standing ovation is manufactured. I still feel the satisfaction when it comes. That is the confession at the heart of this book. Not that I did not know, I have known since I was 10. Not that I could not stop. I could not, but that is an explanation, not a confession. The confession is that I did not want to stop. The pharmacist is also a patient. the drug I dispensed to others, I also consumed. Now here is the question the book does not answer because I am not sure it can be answered and I refuse to pretend otherwise. If the sedation thesis is correct, if art's primary institutional function across 25 centuries has been to manage the emotional life of populations in the service of stability and obedience, then what? What do we do with that? I do not say stop making art. The pain is real, the need is real, the medication is the only medication available. The aesthetic analgesic, the story, the song, the play, the painting, the film, the poem is the human species' oldest and most effective response to the pain of consciousness. And no book, including mine, can replace it with something better. Because there is nothing better. I do not say, stop consuming art. The patient is in pain now. The cure, if it exists, is not available now. The analgesic is available now. The pharmacist dispenses the analgesic. This is not cynicism. This is pharmacy. What I say is, know what you are taking. Know what it does. Know that the catharsis is real and that the catharsis is a technology. Know that the beauty is real and that the beauty is the active ingredient in a prescription for stillness. Know that the emotional resolution you feel at the end of the film, the satisfaction of the narrative arc completed, the warmth of the standing ovation, is the mechanism by which your capacity for action is being discharged. Know it, and take the medicine anyway if you need to. Because you probably need to. Because the pain of being conscious in a world that offers no satisfactory explanation for consciousness is real and constant, and there is nothing wrong with managing it. But do not confuse the management of the pain with the treatment of the disease. The disease is structural. The disease is institutional. The disease is economic, political, architectural. Art cannot cure it. Art can only make it bearable. And making it bearable is what keeps it in place. The book ends with a bell. My grandfather's pharmacy had a bell above the door. When a customer entered, the bell rang. When the customer left, the bell rang again. Between the two rings, the transaction occurred. The pain was acknowledged. The prescription was filled. The payment, whatever its currency, was accepted, and the pharmacy continued because people were in pain and the pharmacist had what they needed. This book is the bell. It does not close the pharmacy. The pharmacy cannot be closed. It announces that someone has entered, not as a patient but as a witness. Listen, the bell rings. A patient enters. The pharmacist looks up. What do you need? Beautiful Numbness, Art, Sedation, and 25 Centuries of the Standing Ovation is available now from David Bowles Books. You can find the ebook on Amazon, order the paperback, or download a free PDF from bowlesbooks.com. Until next time, remain seated at your own risk. For the Human Meme Podcast, I'm David Bowles, wishing you a glorious evening and a righteous tomorrow. Thanks for listening. Be a human meme.